this special Halloween episode of Attic Raiders Retro Reviews, where this evening we are celebrating the 125th anniversary of Bram Stoker's legendary novel, as we take a look at the Game of Dracula. The Game of Dracula was released by Waddingtons in 1977 and is a game for 2 to 4 players aged 7 and up. In this game you play a foolish mortal who has taken refuge from the storm in a castle. But not any castle. This one belongs to Count Dracula, the most famous vampire in all the world. You must escape quickly before he or any of his vampire bats catch you, drag you back to his coffin, and make you into one of the living dead. It is a fairly simple roll and move game, but one with lots of choices and twists and turns which allow it to rise above its brethren, like the dead rising from their graves. This was one of Waddington's early board games from back when they were still known as the House of Games. And so the production value of the game pieces and the game mechanics are still quite simple, and yet there is enough to sink your teeth into. You can see this features some of Waddington's beautiful painted artwork on the box cover. There you see Dracula and his minions hunting his victims, some of which look far too happy for the situation. We do not see much of the actual game on the front cover, but the back of the box has a nice big photograph showing the game components and plenty of text explaining the game. At 45 years old, the Game of Dracula is getting long in the tooth, but does it suck, or indeed bite? Or is it a good game, which is just looking for some fresh blood to discover it? Let us take a closer look at the components and find out.
The game comes with 2 6-sided dice, a standard red one which is going to be used for moving Dracula around the board, and a white one which is going to be used for moving players around the board. This one only goes up to 4 even though it's got 6 sides, because 2 of those sides have got a V marked on them, and those are going to be used for moving the vampire bats. We've got 4 different colours of playing pieces, and these are, quite frankly, really dull. They're very boring, especially compared with the other playing pieces in this game. We've got 2 different colours of vampires, a blue one and a green one, and as you can see, these are a much better sculpt and far more interesting than those playing pieces, and although they are referred to as vampires, they're clearly vampire bats. And then we have Count Dracula himself, which is quite a nice sculpt. I do like this. It's obviously quite retro or vintage looking, which has a lot to do with the manufacturing process and how this had to be made so that it could be made by the machines. But you can see he quite clearly looks like the famous vampire from Bram Stoker's novel, and it's a nice piece. We've got this rather nice green vampire mask here, which has got some really good painted detail on it, but unfortunately it's made from a really thin cardboard. It's not very sturdy. You can see it tends to bend and crease in places where it's not supposed to, and if you're not careful it's going to rip, particularly at these slots down here, because this is supposed to bend and slot together so that it becomes 3D, which is a really nice touch, but it does mean that these are weak points where this will rip, and so there's not many of these masks around. They do tend to get broken and then thrown out, so if you're picking up a copy of this game, try to get one with the mask. Now it would be nice if there was actually some holes in here so you could put string or elastic so you could actually wear this, but there isn't. You're just supposed to hold it up to your face like this. It's not really necessary for the game as such, but it is a nice little touch. The board itself is this nice quality, thick cardboard which has a half fold, and it's nice and bold and colourful in its artwork. The board shows the plan of Count Dracula's castle with all of the various rooms inside it, including his coffin up here in the corner, and the various rooms in the castle are coloured green, pink and white to help differentiate them from each other. To set up the game, the coloured playing pieces go on the starting space of the same colour. The green vampire bat goes on to vampire perch number 1, the blue vampire bat goes on to perch number 6, and Count Dracula goes into his coffin. The object of the game then is to be the first player to move from their starting position through Count Dracula's castle along one of these yellow paths and escape out through this home space here or this home space here, while avoiding the green vampire, the blue vampire and Count Dracula himself. Whoever's going to go first takes the 2 dice and rolls them, and that's going to determine how they move. The red die here shows that Count Dracula is going to move 3 spaces along this red path here, whereas the white die shows that the player can move 3 spaces in any direction along the yellow path. Now you can either move your playing piece and then Dracula, or Dracula and then your playing piece, whichever way round is up to you, and it can make a difference to gameplay. As I said, players can move in any direction along the yellow path, but they can't stop on the same space as another player, they can't move past a vampire bat, they can't stop on a vampire bat perch, and they can't stop in the same colour room that Dracula is in. They can, however, move through a room that Dracula is in, as long as they don't actually stop there. As Dracula moves around his castle following this red blood trail, he can only move in a clockwise direction. He can't ever go backwards, but there are some points where he has a choice of going in one of 2 different directions. He can move along these dotted lines instead in order to take shortcuts. Now Dracula is not very happy about these people being in his castle, so if he lands in the same room as another player, then that player is going to get bitten and carried off to Dracula's tomb. If at any point you think that Dracula is close to moving into your colour of room and biting you and dragging you back to his coffin, then you can use your move to move into one of these orange safe spaces. If you're in there when Dracula moves into the room, then he can't get you. If on your go you roll a V, then instead of moving Dracula and moving your own playing piece around the castle, you are going to move one of the vampire bats, because this stands for Vampire 2. And that means we're going to take the green vampire bat and move him onto vampire bat perch number 2 over here. If you roll a V1, 2, 3 or 4, then you're going to be moving the green vampire bat to perch number 1, perch number 2, perch number 3 or perch number 4. If you roll V5 or V6, then you're going to be moving the blue vampire bat to perch number 5 or to perch number 6. Now at this point the vampire bats can't actually bite you, so it doesn't matter if they're in the same room as you, they just act as blockers, blocking off these doorways, which can be quite annoying. This blue one particularly is either always in front of this home space here or this home space here, so there's only ever one escape out of the castle at any time, and it can change at any point. If Dracula stops in the same coloured room as you and bites you and drags you off to his coffin, this is where the game now gets more interesting. If you're the first player that Dracula has bitten, then he calls his green vampire over and you become the green vampire. You stay here in Dracula's coffin until your next go. However, if another player rolls a V, then you have to move to whichever vampire perch they rolled. If no Vs are rolled before your turn, then you have to move to vampire perch number 1, and that's your go over. On your next go though, you are now going to move as the green vampire and try to capture and bite other players. To do that, you're going to roll both of the dice, and this time instead of moving Dracula, you're going to add together the 2 numbers that you roll, and that's how many spaces you can move. If you happen to roll a V, then you're going to have to move to the vampire perch as you would normally. This roll would allow you to move 4 spaces, so we can move 1, 2, which is biting and capturing the other player, and then 3, 4 moving away from them to try to get away. This other player is now the vampire and you are free. Now the thing is, you want to get rid of this vampire as quickly as you can because you can't leave the castle while being a vampire. The new vampire player is then going to take the mask and wear it, and on their turn they're going to try and bite other players. Now they could go for the player who has just bitten them if they really want, or they can go for any other player. Once players start moving as the green vampire, then these orange spaces then become safe spaces for other players. They're not just safe from Dracula entering the room, they're safe from a vampire biting you. The other restriction with vampire bats is that they're scared of light, so they can't actually move past these candelabra spaces. So whereas this player, by moving here, is still vulnerable to being bitten, if they had moved to here instead, they would have been safe, or if they just moved to this other side of this candelabra, then the vampire bat wouldn't be able to get them. Once the green vampire is in play as a movable character piece rather than just a blocker, then if Dracula happens to land in the same room as you and bites you, he still carries you off to his coffin, but this time, instead of having to start as the green vampire, he's going to let you go and you're going to have to exit on your next turn out through this space here and go all the way around here in order to continue the game. If you can avoid the green vampire and Count Dracula, and the blue vampire is not on his perch in front of the home space, then on your turn you can eventually escape out and win the game.
The game pieces and the artwork are certainly showing their age by today's gaming standards, but they have a certain vintage charm, like a gently mouldering corpse, and I, for one, enjoy that. This may be a game in which you roll the dice and move, but you have got a lot of options open to you. The pathway through the castle meanders in many different directions with many different paths available to you, and Dracula as well, although being restricted to moving only clockwise, has branching passages that he can move down, allowing for much more variety and unpredictability in his movements. It is much quicker to move straight through the middle of the castle towards the exits. However, the white room in the center of the castle is very large, and it is very easy for Dracula to enter it. In general, it is best avoided unless you have a death wish or are very brave indeed. It must be said that being captured by Dracula and taken back to his coffin can be a bit of a pain in the neck, having to essentially start your journey all over again. Quite often in this game can really be a bit of a drag. And my wife, for one, does not like this game for that precise reason. Between having to start again and being captured by vampire bats and turned into one yourself, this game can go on a bit, but it could also be argued that that is all part of the fun. You must play tactically to use the escape rooms, those hidden cubby holes and the chandeliers, to work tactically to avoid all the vampires in the castle. The roll of the dice does give an element of luck that is unavoidable, but in such games you are always going to have this random nature which gives an element of fun to it, and I think is balanced in this game with your options and the moves you have available to you. Getting close to the home space, but then having a vampire bat blocking your way all of a sudden can be infuriating, but that is all part of the game and is very funny for the other players. This is a game where you must not concentrate too much on yourself winning, but instead take joy in the misery of others. The back and forth with the vampire bat chasing and biting and catching and turning other players, then having to run away, can seriously prolong this game, but once again, it can be part of the fun. For me, Dracula is one of the great universal monsters, a legendary creature renowned the world over, and for that alone, the theme of this game makes it worth it for me. In the world of vintage games, there are not a lot of vampire games, but this is one of the better ones. It is a wholehearted recommendation from me. I would stake my reputation on it, but only if you are a fan of vintage games. Modern gamers are unlikely to enjoy this. Well, I hope that you have enjoyed this special episode this evening. If you have, please remember to like, subscribe, and leave a comment down below. Until next time, sleep easy, sleep heavy, and just ignore that scraping at the window. We will see you next time on Attic Raiders Retro Reviews.